Overworked, mentally fatigued, and an increase in knee injuries. My childhood was pretty jarring. But all of these things have had an actual impact on professional football as well, and also Robert Sanchez. And with the brand new expanded Club World Cup coming this summer, that could be about to get even worse. It's a new 32-team month-long tournament that comes a week after an international break and just 2 weeks after the end of an already grueling season. FIFA are not protecting their players, and here's why.
Constant, dizzying, 24-hour, year-long, endless football. Every kick of it massively mattering to someone, presumably. It will never stop. The football is officially going on forever. It will never be finally decided who has won the football. There is still everything to play for and forever to play it in. So that's the football.
Do you know what the motto for the Club World Cup is? Take it to the world.
Your breath stinks. Just shut up.
That in itself is enough for it to get cancelled immediately straight off the bat. Now, for those that aren't too familiar with the Club World Cup and how it operates, let's take a little look back at its history, starting all the way back in 2000 for its first ever edition. It was the turn of the millennium. It saw the release of the PlayStation 2, and Coldplay released their debut album. And it was also the year in which FIFA decided that a Champions League and a World Cup could basically be mashed together. You see, the World Cup was for international teams, but why couldn't we have a similar type of competition for domestic clubs, to see teams from South America play teams from Africa and play teams from Europe? And so that tournament made its debut. Said Club World Cup saw Champions League winners Manchester United play against Intercontinental Cup winners Real Madrid. It also saw the likes of Vasco da Gama, Corinthians, Al Nassr pre-Cristiano Ronaldo. So probably better. Mexican side, Club Necaxa, as well as Rayo Casablanca from Morocco and South Melbourne of Australia. It was a truly global competition from all corners of the world, but it only saw 8 teams competing, so it didn't really get in the way of the actual normal regular season too often or too much. Apart from the fact that it was played in January for some reason. It was like right in the middle of the whole. But either way, you were playing 4 games maximum if you got to the end of the tournament. And there wasn't too many players playing, of course. There's only 8 teams globally across the whole world. It wasn't really having a massive impact on too many players. It was like throwing a couple FA Cup replays into the mix. And to be honest, it seemed like a pretty good idea. Ultimately, you were never going to really get teams like South Melbourne ever playing against Manchester United before now, unless it was a friendly and it didn't mean anything.
All of a sudden, I'm thinking, mate, I'm closing this guy down, I'm closing that guy down. I'm going, where is everyone? Right? And then I noticed there's probably 2 or 3 guys just hovering around David Beckham. Waiting for the final whistle because clearly they wanted his shirt. You
could still win a trophy with this competition, you could still earn bragging rights, and you could still earn prize money for your clubs. Whilst it was a bit of a distraction, it seemed like a good idea, certainly at a small scale. Then for the second edition in 2001, it was cancelled. Yeah, they sacked it off immediately. They didn't want to do it anymore. It was supposed to be in Spain, but it was cancelled altogether because FIFA's marketing partner, the company in charge of that, just hit the stairs as a business. Anyway, there'd be a little hiatus until 2005, but then it would take place every year until 2023. It would remain in its usual format, fluctuating between 6 or 7 clubs, only really taking an extra 3 or 4 games out on players a year. It would largely be dominated by European sides, but with a couple of wins for Brazilian teams sprinkled into the mix every now and again. Now, you might be wondering why I have such a problem with a tournament like this. And the truth is, I didn't have a problem with this tournament at all until it was announced that it was going to get expanded to 32 teams. 6 or 7 to 32. That's a little bit of an upgrade, so let's see the teams that are actually involved. From Asia, we've got Al Hilal, Urawa Red Diamonds, Al Ain from UAE, and Ulsan in high definition. We've got Al Ahly, Wydad AC, Esperance de Tunis, and Mamelodi Sundowns from Africa, Monterrey, Seattle Sounders, Pachuca, and LAFC, Palmeiras, Flamengo, Menense, Boca Juniors, and City, Real Madrid. There's a lot of teams, all right? That is actually the basic level of everything that's going on here. There's too many. It's not even arguably there is. Everybody's playing. Your uncle is involved in this tournament. I can guarantee you that. Now, I know there was a lot to actually take in there in terms of the clubs involved, but obviously you got pretty much all of the major teams, the major players as far as European football is concerned. If you've seen them in a Champions League final in the last 3 years, they're probably part of this tournament. If they've won a Copa Libertadores or the Brazilian or Argentine league, they're probably here. And whilst that's amazing, these teams are already kind of depleted based on how difficult and how grueling their actual season was in terms of the amount of games they played. I mean, imagine being a Real player at the moment. Imagine being one of their physios with a defense that's currently occupied by window cleaners and 15-year-olds they found out on the street of Madrid, realizing they've got another entire tournament to play in. FIFA said to Rodri's knee directly they don't give a fuck when they visited him in the hospital. Let's be honest, his teammate Jack Grealish doesn't even know what's going on in this situation. He'll be thinking he's won Man City the actual World Cup because he didn't actually read the tournament name properly. He doesn't want to be involved in playing these teams. He wants to go on holiday. He wants to go to Ibiza. He'll be bringing the Jaegers out instead of playing Mamelodi Sundowns. So I know, yeah, there's a lot of big clubs involved. And there's also a lot of, like, relatively speaking, world stage, smaller clubs involved, who are the biggest clubs in their nations, but they aren't necessarily nations that succeed on the global stage. And whilst they'll be excited they get to play against some of the best teams in the world, imagine being a South African right back getting drawn in a group against Real Madrid, PSG, and Manchester City. To be fair, at least not everybody's involved. Barcelona somehow didn't qualify for this tournament. Pedri will be bursting into tears of joy, realizing he hasn't got a 17th tournament to play in for the season. This realistically is against all protocols of basic human rights. I'm talking we've got to get the NSPCC, RSPCA, everybody involved to rectify the situation. I just think it's a little bit over the top is what I'm trying to say. I'm all for the expanding of tournaments and making things a little bit more inclusive, but at the same time it's not a tournament's job to just be inclusive. If you're Manchester City, right, and I know it's a bit woe is me, I'm not trying to be like, yo, being a footballer is like a super hard job, but every job has its rights and every sort of global force should look after its workers. I know we're about selling a product here, especially when it comes to FIFA, but if you're burning all your players into the ground by the time they're 26, there's less of a product to actually sell. You've got less players on the front line. Manchester City this season, or a Liverpool next season, or a Real Madrid season, let's say Man City just for the sake of argument, right? Probably going to go quite far in the FA Cup, so you'll play pretty much every game of that. Let's say you play every game in the Carabao Cup, you get to the final or win the whole thing. You'll go far in the Champions League, you've got 38 games in the Prem, and I know EFL fans will be looking at this being like, Nero, what the fuck are you talking about, boss man? We have to play 46 games in the Football League, we have to play Carabao Cup, FA Cup, Johnston Paint Trophy. I know it's not called that. It changes sponsor every year, man. I can't keep up with that shit. These teams have got it easy, and I totally understand, but I do, Man City, Liverpool's, Barca's, whatever, they do have to play continental football as well, and this is less about the fact that it's extra games. That is a problem as well. We'll talk about FA Cup replays a little bit later on in this video, because that's also a counterpoint. The actual issue here is not that it's more games, it's the timing of this tournament. This is the one time of the year where the players are supposed to actually get a break. Let's say you reach the Champions League final. It's what, like May 31st this year? End of May, you finally finish for the season, right? You've got June and you've got July and you've got a little bit of August to actually relax, right? Obviously, you've got pre-season and all of that as well. And pre-season usually starting in sort of like late June, July, realistically. This tournament starts mid-June and ends mid-July. That's the entire time that players actually get off from the season. They're just going straight into pre-season again with a FIFA Club World Cup in the middle. And let's break this down even further. In terms of the actual schedules of everything, as I mentioned, the Champions League final is right at the end of May, okay? But even if you don't reach the Champions League final, the chances are your domestic campaign ends, in like 5 days as I'm recording this video. So like 25th, 26th of May. So either way, you've played football all the way through May, right? Doesn't matter whether you got to a Champions League final or a Cup final or not. There is then an international break that will see national teams playing until June the 10th. And if you are to be involved in the Club World Cup, that means you'd then be traveling thousands of miles to play in a tournament that starts just 4 days after the international break ended. So in the case of Lionel Messi, for example, who's definitely like an extreme case in this scenario, he could potentially, as a 37-year-old, travel from Inter Miami's ground after playing Columbus Crew in the MLS on June the 1st. He'd then fly to Chile for an international fixture with Argentina on June the 5th. So that's a flight from America to Chile. Then for June the 10th, he's hosting Colombia with Argentina. So 5 days later, he's now flying to Argentina. And then for the first game of this tournament on June 14th, so 4 days later again, he'd fly to the Hard Rock Stadium to play against Al Ahly, which would add up to 4 games in 14 days. Doesn't sound absolutely crazy until you factor in the fact that he's traveled 9,500 miles during that time period. That is ludicrous. That's absolutely mental. A domestic campaign, then 4 days into an international break, then 4 days into a month-long Club World Cup tournament is bonkers. That is absolutely ludicrous. Imagine someone like a Lautaro Martinez. You're going into perhaps the biggest game of your entire career with Inter as they face off against Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League final. Very similar thing, end of May. Then he's off to do international duty with Argentina as well. And given Inter Milan have also qualified for this tournament, he'd then have a month-long campaign playing in the Club World Cup before diving straight into pre-season with Inter again. Now, it's unsurprising there's been a lot of contesting this when it comes to the actual health and well-being of footballers. FIFA, who are the Global Footballers Union, said that the schedule demonstrated a lack of consideration for the mental and physical health of participating players. Maheta Malango, who is the chief exec of England's Professional Footballers Association, also said that this year, so 2024-25, is when people realise that all of it doesn't fit. It's no longer a question of being a threat that's coming down the line, it is actually here. And that being the fact that players are completely overworked. This isn't a situation of now or in a couple of years, these players, their bodies are going to be breaking down because they're playing too many games, they're not getting any breaks during a season. It's here, it's arrived with the expanding of this tournament. And as I said, I completely agree because it's more about the timing. You know, I know there's talk about shoehorning more games into seasons, whether it be Nations League games or the expanding of the Champions League by a couple of fixtures a year, right? But those are at least during the season. This is the off season where players are supposed to be getting that recovery period in. If their bodies are breaking down at the end of a season, if they're injured at the end of a campaign, they get a couple of months before they have to play again. But let's be unbiased for a second here because there's positives and negatives. Positives. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Right, on to the negative. No, I'm joking. Ultimately, yeah, as I said, inclusivity-wise, if you're a fan of a slightly smaller nation in the footballing sphere, if you're a fan of Ulsan in 4K, for example, you get to see your team play Man City, Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm not trying to be that classic top 6 fan who's like, oh, I don't give a fuck about teams in the EFL or teams outside of the elite in the Champions League. That is undoubtedly cool for someone who's a fan of a club from Tunisia or a fan of a club from Morocco or a fan of a club from South Korea or the UAE, and that would be great for them to go and see. Realistically, if it was somewhat closer for most of them, are we really gonna get fans in their droves and in their masses? I mean, maybe I'll be proven wrong on this one. I just don't see a world where a mass amount of fans from the United Arab Emirates are interested in traveling all the way to Miami to see Al Ain play maybe 2 of the best teams in the world in what will in essence be a glorified preseason friendly, because I doubt these teams will play absolutely their best possible teams. I mean, to be fair, the prize money for this tournament is enough to buy all of your dreams, aspirations, and probably Rasmus Højlund on top, which will, I'm sure, incentivize teams to play at least somewhat of a strong lineup a lot of the time. But even still, there'll be a lot of rotation. You'll have young players involved who maybe weren't involved in the season quite as aggressively and intensely as some of the key starters. But at the end of the day, it's also a marketing and sponsorship opportunity, and ultimately, money is the main ambition for FIFA.
Even though you have 10 million trophy, you can't use that to go and buy food in the supermarket.
As I said, honestly, I don't know if we need to see like a team from Tunisia play against a team from Austria. Is that really what global fans need? Is that what the players need? I don't know. The other positive is going to sound like a bit of a backhanded one, but it's the fact that this only happens every 4 years. You might have thought from the way that I'm describing this that it's actually something that's going to happen every year, like the old format of the Club World Cup. It's not. The next one isn't until 2029 and then 2033 and so on and so forth, which does dilute the issue somewhat for sure. I'm not going to take away from that. I think if it was every 2 years even, this would be borderline despicable, but every 4 years does make it at least somewhat sustainable, maybe. But even then, you know, you're going to have players now going into next season, so 25-26, having had absolutely no break whatsoever. And I think next season you're going to get a lot of injuries to a lot of key players. And that's where we talk about the negatives. And it's very obvious this is going to harm the players. It's going to harm the elite players, and I mean the ones that are actually involved in the Club World Cup. And that's still a small percentage in comparison to all football players across the globe, in terms of all players in England that are going to be involved. Like Manchester City are going to have loads of injuries next season, I reckon, off the back of this. Teams like that, teams like Real Madrid are going to have even more. And these teams have already been pretty depleted. You know, we've had an increase in ACL injuries for sure over the last 3 or 4 years. Yes, they can be handled better. Physio is much better. Treatment is much better than it was 20, 25 years ago, where an ACL injury would potentially completely kill off a career, even if it only happened once. That isn't necessarily as much the case anymore, but they're still dangerous injuries injuries, and they still change a footballer forever. We've had so many of those this season. We've had so many injuries generally, like Tottenham, Man United, Arsenal. They've all had huge injury crises. If we look across Europe, teams like Real Madrid have been completely depleted of all defenders for half the season now. Last season, we had injury crises for Newcastle. The season before, it was Liverpool. I don't know, injuries are part of football. Jesus Christ, it never used to be this bad. Now, I spoke about it briefly earlier on, and the one area where I don't have sympathy for these clubs is that they will happily go do this. They'll happily go and do, you know, international games or continental matches for pre-season friendlies, but they'll vote against FA Cup replays. And this is where EFL fans take your flowers, because things like this happening, but FA Cup replays being abolished, FA Cup replays that can single-handedly save multiple non-league clubs at a time, that can single-handedly put players on the map, and that single-handedly really give the FA Cup its own identity, to be honest with you as well. That being ripped away from English football, whilst Manchester City are happily jetting off, because the clubs, let's be honest, let's get real, the clubs are happy to do this. Bare prize money, bare marketing opportunities across the world. They don't give a fuck, truly, about their players' welfare. They'll pump these players into the ground if it's going to earn them £100 million extra. But travelling away to Stevenage on a Wednesday, yeah, that's too far, unfortunately. Yeah, no, we can't be doing that. Let's not get away from the facts, though. This is a bad idea. Gianni Infantino is only interested in money, like every FIFA president or vice president or chief executive officer that has ever existed before him. And one day it's going to grind our favourite footballers into the dirt. Because it started with stuff like the Nations League. Then it carried on with the expansion of the World Cup. Then it carried on further with the expansion of the Champions League. Now it's the creation of a Club World Cup for 32 teams in the off-season. And it won't stop. It will continue and it will carry on until these players are playing 70, maybe 80 games in a year. But what do you make of this, though? Drop it down below in the comments section. Do you think that the competition is a good idea? Or are you kind of agreeing with me in the fact that it's going to overwork the players? There are positives and negatives, there are, but I think overarchingly FIFA has a duty to look after its players, and I don't think it's doing that right now. If you have enjoyed this video, though, feel free to slap a like on it, and of course subscribe if you are new to the channel. As I mentioned at the start, 750,000 subscribers, and we will be testing out that knee. You can also follow me on social media. It is at TheOfficialFNG on Twitter and on Insta. It's been a pleasure ranting at you guys today. Have a wonderful day, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.